Hello, everyone, and welcome to Triangle Be Well. I'm your host, Howard Jacobson, and I am joined in the studio by my producer, Amnon Nissan. Hello, Amnon.
Hello, Howard. How are you?
I'm very well, very well. So, today I want to talk about how do we know what we know, especially when it relates to nutrition, when it relates to health, because there's so much confusion out there, so many conflicting ideas that a lot of people just go, you know what, everything's going to kill you. Might as well not worry about it. In fact, there was an article last week in the New York Times saying something about the top element of a healthy diet is best guess, saying that basically nutritional science is somewhere in the dark ages, that we really have no idea what's healthy, what's not healthy. And that kind of fatalism leads a lot of people to make bad decisions. So today I'm not going to talk so much about the evidence as how we gather the evidence and what's presented to us. I invite you, if you have questions or comments, to interact. You can call in at 919 518 9773, and you can also Skype in at Computers 2K Voice. That's the Skype ID that you can reach out to, and we can have a conversation about all this. Before we get into that, Amnon has reminded me that I have not really talked about what I do. And so I'd like to spend a few minutes explaining my specialty because there's only maybe a dozen people in the world who do it. So it's not something, it's not like you go and say, what do you do? I'm a lawyer, I'm an accountant, I'm a candlestick maker. People don't have a frame of reference to even know that this service is available. And what I do is essentially two things: education and empowerment. And the education is really helping people with their medical decisions. So I believe in informed consent, and I've talked about this. I did a whole session on informed consent, that you have the right as a consumer of anything to know the risks and benefits of all your choices. And in the medical world, you're not given that. And especially when you become a patient, when you're diagnosed with a clinical condition, with a disease, you're basically put in a position of being helpless and of just following, you're strapped in. It's like you're on a roller coaster ride. You're now strapped in, the sirens are blaring, and any move you make that's not in compliance with the med tech model is something that puts you at great risk. So you're told. So when they say, we've just discovered a tumor on Thursday and you need to go in for radiation on Monday and there's no time to waste, well, occasionally that's true, but most of the time it isn't. And most of the time we're driven by fear and by misinformation. So, one of the things I do is help people get all the correct information. So, if you have a lifestyle disease, if you have diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, cancer, if you've had a stroke, if you're at risk, if you have autoimmune disease or asthma or eye problems, the medical model will never get you well. The medical model is designed to treat disease. And in fact, there are lots of alternatives that are wellness based. There's the whole field of lifestyle medicine, which is a very, very unknown, ugly stepsister of the medical model, but one that will actually help you get better. I did an interview this week on my Plant Yourself podcast with Alan Goldhammer, who's the founder and director of True North Health Center. They use diet, exercise, rest, and water fasting to help people resolve and recover from supposedly incurable diseases. And not just occasionally, but all the time. And what he experiences on a daily basis, multiple times a day, is something that most doctors will never experience: somebody getting better, somebody being cured, somebody no longer having the clinical symptoms and walking away in wellness. So if you are stuck in the medical system, and what does that mean? It means you've been given some diagnosis and you're basically told the only way to manage it is with drugs, or the main way you're going to manage it is with drugs or surgery. And the drugs all have side effects and the surgeries are risky and your doctors aren't listening to you. And you feel like you don't have an advocate and you feel like there's got to be something else. And you go on Google and you just get more and more confused. that's where I come in. So I do a concierge medical consulting practice. I also have a generalized membership if you don't have any particular issues right now, but you just don't want to get them. So a health promotion and disease prevention program. And the other thing I do, aside from education, is empowerment. So let's say you want to improve your diet. You realize that if you have type 2 diabetes, you can eat your way out of it. But we're creatures of habit, and foods are highly addictive, and palatable foods all the more so. And you want some help, and you want coaching and guidance and support and advice on the doing, on physically changing the way you live so that you can get better. That's empowerment. And that's something that I offer as well. I spent 15 years in the corporate world as a marketing coach, a performance coach, a leadership coach, helping people achieve their best performance. And largely that means helping people get out of old habits so that they can adopt new, better ones. So I know how to do it. I've done it. I've been paid a lot of money in the corporate world for many years to help people change their behaviors. And it can be done in the realm of physical health as well. And so if you have any questions about that, or you want to talk to me, we can grab a few minutes on the phone to see if there's a fit. You can just go to trianglebewell.com and read up on it, fill out the contact form, and let's talk. All right. How was that, Amnon? How was that?
I was what? I'm sorry. I'm
Oh,
still fixing.
okay.
I'm sorry.
I thought I had one listener.
Oh, you still owe Ian an answer from last week.
I still owe Ian an answer from last
and
week.
he's waiting there.
Okay, let's get to that real soon. Remind me of the question.
You don't have it written down.
I didn't bring my notebook. Maybe Ian can post it again for those of
Go
us
ahead, Ian.
who are over.
You keep
Okay.
going. Here.
Okay, we'll handle that in just a couple of minutes. So what I was asking, I did a couple minute explanation of what I do. So I wanted to know if that was strong enough, if people can will understand it. So today, what I'm
He just hit me. I thought I have at least one.
yeah. What I'm talking about today really ties into the specialty I have around doing research. So, I've contributed to two really important books in the last 3 years on health, nutrition, science, and research. One of them, the more recent, is called Proteinaholic. Its lead author is Dr. Garth Davis. And the one before that, in 2013, Whole, with lead author T. Colin Campbell. And in both books, we put in chapters on research, because in both books, we're asking people to now believe things that are opposite of what they had believed before. And we can't just do that. You can't just say, no, everything else was wrong. Now I'm going to teach you something new. You have to explain what's the evidence and how do we evaluate the evidence. So I'm going to start by going through the chapter in Proteinaholic called Research Truth and BS, How to Speak Science. So these are some of the issues that we're going to consider when we want to understand how good is a source of information. And let's begin with, where do we get our information? A lot of people get their health information online, from blogs, from their Facebook feed, and from friends sending articles. And we don't want to be rude to our friends. We don't want to question them. We don't want to be negative on people, making negative comments on people's Facebook feeds. So a nice general comment is, be curious. Oh yeah, so coconut oil is going to help you live forever? Really? What's the evidence for that? Oh, eggs are very good for us? Oh, what's the evidence for that? And because who knows? We could all be wrong. Everything I believe could be wrong. There could be new evidence that overturns hundreds of years of nutritional research. I'm open to that. I'm a scientist. I'm not a dogmatist. So a dogmatist believes something regardless of the evidence. Um, there's nothing you could show that person that would get them to change their mind. I don't want to be like that. So I'm always open to what is the evidence. So it's a great question to ask. So how does science get to us? Let's start with that, the general ecosystem of if you went to school and you studied biology, you learned about the Krebs cycle. You learned about, so it'll be a picture of a mouth, and here's some food coming in, and then how it gets to all the cells in the body, how the nutrients get there, how the waste products get flushed out. And you get these, diagrams with arrows going in certain directions, and we can then have a picture of how the food becomes uh, fuel for our body. So let's do the same thing, but instead of doing food into fuel, let's do science into public beliefs, into what makes it into our world. So let's start with the perfect world. Let's start with the ideal picture. Maybe I can find that picture in whole because we drew it out. I don't remember where it is. Well, let's see if I can remember it. So it starts with, let's say, in a perfect world, science starts with really important questions. So scientists are interested in something. There's a lacuna, there's a gap in our knowledge, and they want to know something new. And ideally, learning this new thing um, comes because there's a need for it, because people will have better lives if we understand this thing, if we develop these new technologies, if we can prevent certain processes, if we can live more harmoniously in the world. So understanding the world, basically science got its pedigree in terms of human beings understanding the world. So before we had big labs and high tech, scientists were basically observationalists. Charles Darwin would just go out into the world, go to the Galapagos, he'd sit and observe. So spending hundreds and hundreds of hours just watching the world and trying to make sense of it for us. Back to Da Vinci, back to the ancient Greeks, it was an observation. They would make a hypothesis, a theory about the world, and then they go and look and see, does this hold up? Does it hold up all the time? Does it hold up under every circumstance? Can we generalize to other things? Can we make predictions based on the hypothesis? And that's kind of the litmus test of a good scientific theory, is we can make predictions upon it, based on it, and those predictions will be proved true. And as long as the predictions are proved true, we say the theory holds up. When those predictions start to falter, either a new case is discovered or somewhere along the edges or the extremes, let's say, Newtonian physics worked very, very well for several hundred years based on, we could make predictions based on it, on how, far this rock will roll if we drop it down this hill, or what kind of damage will be caused if these two things collide, or how fast does a loop-de-loop roller coaster have to go so that people don't fall out at the top. Newtonian physics did very well for all that. It started to falter at the subatomic level, and we needed a new kind of physics theory. We needed quantum physics, and at even smaller levels that began to falter. So scientists have created string theory, various other theories that try to explain the things that are not explainable or not in line with existing theory. Same thing happened in astronomy, right? We had the ancient Greeks. Pretty much everyone knew that the sun revolved around the earth because that's what it looked like, right? You wake up in the morning, there's the sun on the horizon. You watch it go across the sky, set at the other horizon. And so obviously it's making a circle. And you know what? The predictions based on that theory are very good. And they held up for a long time. It was only at certain levels, at certain points, did the Earth-centric theory of the universe start to falter. And so another theory, the heliocentric, the sun-centric theory, that the Earth revolved around the sun, explained everything just as well as the old theory, and some things better. Some things were anomalous unless we assumed that the Earth moved around the sun. And so that became the working theory. So back to science, back to modern nutritional science. We have working theories and we test them out. And there's a second kind of science, as in addition to observational science, which you could call testing, or the manipulative science, where we actually do interventions. We don't just watch the world, but we make changes to the world and we see what happens. So it's called experimental science, where we're actually imposing ourselves upon the world and seeing what happens. Now, both of these are really, really important, and they both have great value, and they have great value at different times during the scientific process. So we have these two ways of doing science, and we have a society in which scientists are held in high regard and are tasked with understanding the world better and better so that human beings can live better lives, so the earth can be a better place. So then scientists would observe things and they would run experiments to test their hypotheses, and they would report this. And they would report it in scientific journals in scientific language, right? We all have a jargon that we speak that other people don't understand, right? So Amnon, you work with computers, so I'm sure when you're talking to your computer buddies and you say, "Hey, I have a problem with this," you use language that if I was just your customer coming to you with a computer problem, you wouldn't talk to me about the serial bus problem. You'd say it's too slow. We had some corruption. I changed out a file. Your motherboard is dying. I put in a new one. You'd say very simple things to me.
Right.
But on a forum, you would use words I wouldn't even know what they are.
And you would be using those words with your buddies.
Right. So we all have a jargon.
Yeah.
Scientists have jargon too. And one of the purposes of scientific jargon is for scientists to be very, very specific, much more specific than most people could handle. So when you describe a scientific experiment, you would talk in very, very detailed terms about measurement, about what you were using for measurement, about the tolerances. And most of this stuff doesn't really matter to the lay public, but it's very important to scientists. And the reason it's so important to scientists is that the most important word in science, perhaps, is replicability. Meaning whatever we do, we can do again. So if someone does an experiment and says, "I've discovered that feeding chocolate to mice makes them psychic, and they can now do the New York Times crossword puzzle." Well, that'd be pretty cool, wouldn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So the response of other scientists should be, I find that hard to believe. Tell us exactly what you did so we can replicate the study and see if we get the same results. So science is based on this idea of replicability, and you only have replicability when you have enough detail. If the scientist said, "Well, I took a bunch of mice and I gave them chocolate, and then all of a sudden they were able to squeak out the words in the New York Times crossword puzzle," well, we wouldn't know what kind of mice, how many mice, what kind of chocolate, what kind of doses. How did you measure their squeaks and evaluate that they were actually answers to the New York Times crossword puzzle? So it'd be impossible to redo the experiment to show it's right or it's wrong. So it's understood that when scientists publish in scientific journals for other scientists, that's not necessarily accessible to the lay public. That's okay. There's a very specific way that scientists talk to each other that helps them work. And it's okay that those journals are not accessible to everyone. Now, I don't want to say they're inaccessible. It doesn't take that much to learn some of the basic language of science, but still, there are plenty of studies that I look at that I just say, well, most of this I won't understand. It's a very complex biomolecular discussion with pictures of chemical compounds, the molecular structure of them. And I have to say, well, I don't have that kind of training, so I have to trust somebody. to explain it to me so that I can understand what's going on. And there's a key phrase in there. I've got to trust someone. So we have these articles in scientific journals, and there's still a big jump to where does this science get consumed? Well, it gets consumed by scientists from the journals, and they might replicate the study. They might write articles about it. They might develop symposia and meetings and plan future experiments. So that's one audience for science, is other scientists who are continuing the project. A second audience is government. So governments are tasked with setting up policy to improve the lives of their citizens. Sorry, I can't say that with a straight face. But you know, we're in the realm of theory here. In a perfect world, right, a democratically elected government or any government would be setting policy to maximize the good for its citizens and for its neighbors. Which means that that scientific inquiry, those theories that have been validated through experiment, will get turned into public policy. So let's say that scientists discover that there's a certain degree of curve on a highway that's safe at 55 miles per hour, and that above that, you have to lower the speed limit. So when the scientists, when the physicists do the modeling, and when behavioral scientists look at how people read speed limits, and when fluid dynamicists look at how objects travel on a path, and they put all that together, they might say, okay, we've determined that the maximum safe speed for a 39-degree arc is 62.5 degrees. So then you take that, the government agents responsible for highway safety, traffic safety, would then build in tolerances, would work with designers to figure out signage, would work with psychologists to figure out where you place the signs, public service campaigns. And that's an example of science in the public interest, helping to keep us safe. So that's one consumer, is the government. So a second consumer is industry. So again, we're talking about a perfect ideal world that does not exist. Science makes discoveries, and then people say, boy, I can figure out how to turn that discovery into a product or service. So we had basic research on antibiotics, on penicillin, able to kill certain bacteria, and then we turned it over to the private sector, to pharmaceutical companies, to figure out, well, how do you create penicillin in mass quantities, right? So we're not just all going to walk around with test tubes with moldy bread in it. If we want this to be useful for the war effort, if we want it to be useful for society, we have to figure out ways to synthesize large quantities of it, to assess the purity, to figure out the active ingredients. And that's where private companies come in. Social scientists, we have a question? Oh, we do. How do you do your best? Oh, this is from Ian. How do you do your best with uncertainty? Let's take the scientific evidence for vitamin supplements for B12, vitamin D, and DHA. B12 is an essential dietary requirement, and so a supplement should be taken even if it may be harmful when further evidence becomes available. For vitamin D, I think there's controversy whether to take a supplement. So great question. So it's basically, I want to focus on the idea of uncertainty, because uncertainty is at the heart of science, because all we ever have are theories. And it's one of the word uncertainty has a real meaning in science, and then it has, I would say, a perverted meaning when it comes to public and political discourse. For example, the tobacco industry for decades used the concept of uncertainty to keep people from believing that their products were dangerous and in many cases lethal. So there is always uncertainty. And so what we have to do at that case is look at several things. We need to look at the preponderance of evidence, which I will get into in great detail. We also have to look at risk-benefit. In other words, what is the downside of being wrong in either direction? And to help understand this, we can think of the legal system. We can think of different definitions of proof. So in a criminal trial, the legal definition is is innocent unless proven guilty, and the standard is beyond a reasonable doubt. So we don't know necessarily what that means. It's kind of, we have to feel into it. But there is some sort of standard that if a reasonable person could say, well, I think there's another way this could have gone down that doesn't make this person guilty, then that the defendant has to be considered not guilty. There's other standards for tort law, for civil law. There's lower standards. So you have to say, well, what's the risk of being wrong in any given situation? And in fact, that's baked into every single study, every single experiment, every single observational study that wants to generalize, is we have to say there's a risk that we're wrong here. So when we're talking about something like vitamins, we have to look, and I think I'll do a session on vitamin D at some point. So, but you have to look at, like, are there known harms of taking too much, of taking some? Are there known benefits? So we know that there's definitely benefits of having high vitamin D levels or certain levels of vitamin D in the blood. We also know that vitamin D is not a vitamin. It's a vitamin is defined as something that we take in through food that we can't get otherwise, right? So vitamin C is not a vitamin for carnivores. They don't need it because they can manufacture it themselves. Human beings and primates, plant eaters, to save time and energy, we do not have the ability to metabolize vitamins such as C, the B complex, beta carotene. We do metabolize D from sunlight. So I'll keep coming back to that question as I go through the presentation. So Mel says, why take supplements? Well, exactly. If you can eat real food and get the vitamins the way they were intended by nature, then we're in much better shape. So I'll try to wrap this up and put it all together and use Ian's question as kind of a test case for how this works. So I think that'll come in very useful. Okay, so we're still in the ideal world. Government uses it for policy. Industry uses science to make products and services that people will buy that will make our lives better. Because, right, we're only going to buy things that make our lives better. That's why we spend money. If I spend $5 on a Frappuccino, I believe that Frappuccino will enrich my life more than the $5 in my wallet. Whatever we do, whatever we buy for some utility, and basically it's to have a better life. So and the third group that uses science is the media. Journalists report on it, so it becomes news, and so that the fourth group can then use it, which is consumers, regular old citizens. Since we don't really have access to understanding the research reports in published medical journals or scientific journals, we rely on science journalists to tell us what it means, to tell us what's the evidence, and then we can make decisions. So if science suddenly says, you know what, everyone needs to supplement with vitamin D, which it doesn't, but if it did, then people could say, okay, well, now I can make better decisions. Or if it said we need more vitamin D in our blood, and one way to get it is through sunshine, so then people would make a decision to spend more time in the sun, to cover up less. So we as a general public make decisions based on journalistic interpretations and conveyance of the science that is reported in the scientific journals, that is done by scientists. So in a perfect world, there's a wonderful feedback loop where scientists are always interested in us. They're interested in the people, and they're then always going to be asking questions that will lead to better outcomes for everyone. Obviously, we don't have that system. We have a system that is completely skewed by the profit motive, by the fact that there is a tremendous amount of money to be made. And so what my co-author Colin Campbell says, we don't really have science anymore. We have technology. We are no longer scientists. Most scientists are actually technologists, and they're trying to figure out how to create technologies to bring to market, which will make money, because that's where the funding comes from. Science is very expensive these days. If you want to have a science lab, you need to get funding. And the US government is providing less and less funding, and more funding is coming from industry, from private sources. And that money comes with strings attached. So that's a really important thing to understand. So let's talk about issues in understanding the science. So one of them, which is really the subject of whole, the entire book is really about this one word. It's called reductionism. And to give you an example of reductionism, in Whole, we talk about there's a story of 6 blind men and an elephant. And the 6 blind men come upon an elephant, and they all argue about what an elephant is, because each one of them touches a different part of the elephant. One touches the trunk and says, the elephant is a hose. Another touches the tusk and says the elephant is a spear. A third touches the ear and says the elephant is a fan. A fourth touches a leg and says the elephant is a pillar. The fifth touches the flank and says the elephant is a wall. The sixth touches the tail and says the elephant is a rope. And the 6 blind men then commence to argue about the elephant, because all of them have evidence that supports their point of view. And the problem is not that there is all this evidence. You say that's a good thing. The problem is that nobody realizes that there's an elephant that's bigger than the individual pieces. So reductionism comes about when we're looking at tiny little details in isolation, and we're not relating them to a bigger whole. We're not relating them to a bigger context. In Proteinaholic, we talk about digital photography. So if you ever take a digital photograph, let's say a landscape scene, and there's a beautiful blue sky, you know that digital photographs are made up of pixels. If you expand, if you zoom in enough, you can start to see the individual pixels. And you ever do this? You ever look at like a blue sky pixelated, zoomed in to the level where each pixel is every pixel blue?
No.
No. I don't quite understand how this works.
Because blue is not just blue. It's got blue, and it's got white in it, and it's got other colors.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just sometimes like I'll be on the web and I'm trying to match a color. So I have this little program, this little pipette that I say there's like green swath. The whole thing is green. And then I mouse over it, and then every single pixel is different. There's yellows, there's reds. And if I mouse over a blue sky, I will see orange pixels in there. And I don't understand exactly how that works, but I know that there are orange pixels in that blue sky. So someone looking at the picture or someone looking at the sky, a normal, reasonable, intelligent person would say, that's a blue sky. However, when the scientists start coming up with orange pixels, because they're not looking at the whole picture, because they don't even realize there is a whole picture, they suddenly start saying, well, we think the sky may be orange. And then you have a lot of people with vested monetary interest in promoting an orange sky. So for example, vitamin D supplementation is big business. There's supplement makers who want us to be taking large mega doses of vitamin D, and they have the money to fund these studies. And the studies that say, oh, look, there's an orange pixel, the sky may be orange. There are manufacturers of supplements who are able to say, well, you know what? Routine vitamin D supplementation, we have these couple of little studies that show that there are certain biomarkers that are improved. We don't actually want to look at the whole picture. We don't want to look at whether it improves health or not. We don't want to look at the causal mechanisms, but we're just going to take these teeny little studies and promote the heck out of them. And pretty soon, everyone's wandering around wondering if the sky is orange. So the issue of reductionism is one that befuddles scientists, because scientists don't realize they're working out of this very reductionist paradigm. It's like a fish swimming in water doesn't realize it's in water. Reductionism is the paradigm of modern Western science, and for a lot of reasons. One is it's well funded to find out these little things. Second is there is tremendous competition among different scientific fields for funding. There's a limited amount of funding. There's an infinite number of things we could study. So so one way to get funding is to differentiate yourself. So remember, when we were in school, there was biology. And then we started breaking it up into big fields like molecular biology, naturalism, population biology. And then every specialty started getting subspecialties. And the more specialized you could get, orthomolecular nuclear biology, or, neuropsychoimmunology. So all of these things became fragmented more and more and more. And the more fragmented it got, the more prestigious it was, because you were studying something that nobody else could even understand. And we see this nowhere better than in the field of genetics, where now we're looking at the very source code of human life. And genetics has become very, very sexy. And something like nutrition, which was really big in the beginning of this century, when people were like head over heels and over excitement we discovered vitamins. We know how to cure scurvy. We understand what causes pellagra and beriberi. Right? Nutritional science had its heyday, but that's not very sexy anymore. Now we want to know, how can we replace individual snippets of genetic code to cure disease, to prevent its transmission down genetic lines. So there are reasons that this reductionist mindset is so baked into science that it's hard to see the whole picture anymore. And a lot of the time when we are looking at science that contradicts the truth, it's because it's an orange pixel in a blue field. It's either one anomalous result. So, you could, it's like winning the lottery. You wouldn't expect to win the lottery, but somebody wins the lottery. So there are studies that just get it wrong just by random chance. But if we were being reductionist, we look at that orange pixel and remember the ones that get it wrong and are selling something that someone can make a buck off of are the ones most likely to get promoted into the media, get promoted into our discourse. Because the media is not without bias or without agenda. Most media make money by selling advertising. And you see the influence, the subtle influence of advertisers on these media companies, and very often they're conglomerates and they're selling other things as well. So there's this inherent giant conflict of interest, a conflict of interest so big, it's like you're walking around looking for the crater, but you're in the crater. It's so big we just can't see it. So the idea of industry influence is related to this idea of reductionist. So we got some more questions here. I'm not quite sure what Mel is talking about. Maybe if you can expand on that, Mel, I can speak to it.
Or jump in the sea.
Yeah. So another thing that's not well known. So we think of the money issue coming close to us, so that what the journalists will present or what advertising the media will done, but will pay for. But in fact, funding determines outcome. So here's a study that was performed of 206 studies on the health effects of milk, juice, and soda. So, cow's milk, which we know is terrible for us. Fruit juice, either 100% fruit juice, which is still very, very high in sugar, all the fiber removed, many of the nutrients killed in the pasteurization process, and soda. Like, is anyone out there willing to say that soda is a health food? So a study looked at 206 of those studies on milk, juice, and soda. So 111 of them were declared financial ties to industry. So they got some of their funding or all of their funding from the manufacturer of the beverage in question. All right? So Coca-Cola is funding a study on the health effects of Coca-Cola. Minute Maid is funding a study on the health effects of apple juice, that sort of thing, either in full or in part. So what did they find? So 111 studies of milk, juice, and soda, funded partly or fully by industry. How many of them found that these beverages were harmful? Anyone want to take a guess? Out of 111, how many showed harm, showed that they weren't good for us? 0. Every single study funded by industry showed no problem. Every single study funded by industry said there were no unfavorable findings. It's all fine, no worries. Okay. Now, there were 95 supposedly unbiased articles. Now, there's ways you have to be a real detective to follow the money, because sometimes it's not, the paper trail isn't so clear. So if I'm a scientist and I'm funded by the dairy industry, they might be funding some other research of mine. And so my dairy research doesn't have their fingerprints on it. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that the 95 that didn't declare financial interest were pure. So did they find evidence of harm from juice, milk, and soda? They did, 37% of the time. So more than a third to almost 2/5 of the studies that were not financially funded by the industry found that these were harmful substances, whereas 0 of the studies that were funded by industry found harm. And notice that there were more studies funded than not. 111 funded, 95 not funded. So studies that get funded by industry tend to exist. They tend to get done. Because there's money for them. And the smaller number of studies that are not funded by industry that show, yeah, these things are harmful, are often drowned out. When we look at the total evidence, we see, well, there's many more studies showing no harm, right? There's the 63% plus 100% of the other ones. So there's a lot more, there's very little evidence to show that soda causes harm, when in fact, there's a ton of evidence, but it's being drowned out by the industry funding. Okay. So I'll go over a couple of studies that have come out lately that have gotten a lot of news. So there was one in February 2014, published in Austria, and it was published in an online journal, and it was basically saying that meat eaters are healthier than vegetarians. So very interesting, because there has been a ton of research showing just the opposite, that the less animal products you eat and the more plants and whole grains and legumes, nuts and seeds and fruit, the healthier you are. So here was a very strange, anomalous study. And so first of all, let's look at the downstream. So a study like this, meat eaters are healthier than vegetarians. Do you think the media likes a study like this?
Sensational.
It's sensational. It will sell headlines. It will sell copies. In the old days, right? Remember yellow journalism? You had, the Hearst papers, and they had newsboys standing outside showing the headline and screaming it, because they knew that headline had to sell the whole paper. So what do you think sells papers more? Eating meat is healthy, or eating kale is healthy? Right? You couldn't put eating kale is healthy in a headline. That's under this topic, under the category of, yeah, we know that. That's boring. So anything that we don't know is not boring. So anything that bucks what we know is going to get higher airplay. And especially online, where we have returned to the age of yellow journalism, where most of the online media make their money through advertising, and they make their money based on the size and engagement level of the audience. So if I want an audience that is big and engaged, I want as many people as possible clicking from their Facebook feed to my article saying, meat will, kale will kill you, meat will help you, bacon will help you live longer. I'm going to get a ton of people. And then I want to make it sensational enough that I'm going to have arguments and fights. And I want people to insult each other in the comment section. because that shows high engagement. If people just go visit the page and they only spend a few seconds there, that's not as valuable to advertisers as people who spend hours on the page screaming at each other. So controversy sells. So, okay, so that's why I would tend to disbelieve it. But again, I'm a scientist. I'm not a dogmatist. So I'm going to go take a look. So the article says vegetarians, this was how it was first reported. It was broken by CBS News Atlanta on April 1st, by the way, a date chosen apparently without irony. Vegetarians were twice as likely to have allergies, a 50% increase in heart attacks, and a 50% increase in incidences of cancer. Vegetarians reported higher levels of impairment from disorders, chronic diseases, and suffered significantly more often from anxiety and depression. And so this makes, spreads through wildfire. Austrian study shows vegetarians have a less healthy and are less healthy and have a lower quality of life. So I go and I get the study. I go online, and actually I don't even have to pay for it. I don't have to sign in to my Duke University account, which allows me to see all these different studies. I can get it online. It's in a journal called PLOS One, PLOS One. It's a online journal and it's open access. Anyone can read it. So the study looked at 15,000 people. How many of them do you think were vegetarian? If we're gonna make intelligent comparisons, you need a couple thousand, right?
Easy.
Yeah. So there were 343 vegetarians. So you mathematicians out there, you now have my permission to bang your head against the wall. So we're gonna make valid claims comparing vegetarians to meat eaters when only 343 out of 15,000 are vegetarian. So if you know anything about statistics, you're not going to be able to make any sort of power comparisons. So instead, what they did was they tried to use matched pairs. They took the 343 vegetarians and they tried to match them to similar meat eaters, one for one. Well, they couldn't find matches for 343. They had to drop 13 of them. So now we're down to 330 vegetarians matched to 330 meat eaters out of the 15,000. All right. So, but you know what? We can still salvage this study. If we take these vegetarians and meat eaters and we follow them for several years and we see, well, it's a small number, but maybe the vegetarians are dying in vastly greater numbers of heart disease and cancer, and they're more depressed. We could, 300 and 300, we can still sort of tease that out. No. So we say, well, what did the study look at? Researchers conducted one telephone interview with the study participants, and they said, what are your eating habits and how's your health? Okay. So that was it. It was a snapshot of people saying, well, how do you eat and how well are you? So one of the first things that people do often, and especially in a European country where there's a lot better knowledge of nutrition than there is in the United States, if someone becomes unhealthy, the first thing they might do is change their lifestyle. The first thing you might do when you discover that you've been diagnosed with cancer or heart disease is to go vegetarian. They never ask them, how long have you been vegetarian? So a lot of people who are sick could have turned vegetarian to try to turn it around. So this is like, you know what? A lot of diabetics get insulin injections. So we have a phone survey. We say, are you diabetic? Yes. Do you take insulin? Yes. And we publish a study saying insulin causes diabetes. All right. That's what this study did. So, and that's the problem with a snapshot, is when you're just taking a snapshot, you can't tell what's the cause and what's the effect. And in this case, we're probably inferring backward causation, where the thing we're saying is the effect is actually the cause. So, okay, so those are big problems, but at least we can say something about the vegetarian diet. Well, it turns out we can't, because the researchers labeled people but never said what they were actually eating. There's no mention of how many fruits or vegetables they were eating. In fact, they found that the vegetarians were less likely to take other preventive health measures, which could explain their poor health. If a vegetarian is just avoiding meat for ethical reasons, but they're living on Coca-Cola and Cheetos and deep fried falafel, Well, they're vegetarian, but they're not eating a healthy diet. So if I was a professor and a student turned this in as a freshman paper, I would have to give it an F. Right? This I would say this study was not worth the paper that it was printed on, except luckily it wasn't printed. It was just put in an online journal. And around the world, scientific journalists who do not understand science, who do not understand statistics, who may not even have read the article, who may just have read the abstract, are sharing this information as if it's valuable. Let's give you one more example. I think then we'll call it quits for no. We got plenty of time.
I mean, you need to go for
Another
unless
10 minutes.
someone-
Oh no, this example we'll go for at least 10 minutes. No worries there. So there was a study that proved that the paleo diet can help people lose weight and prevent diabetes. It was published in 2013 in the Journal of Internal Medicine. And so the title is immediately going to put everybody off because it goes, a Paleolithic type diet causes strong tissue specific effects on ectopic fat deposition in obese postmenopausal women. So we know that this is not for us, right? This is not for ordinary people like you or me. This is just the scientists talking among themselves. So we're going to let the science journalists tell us what this means because we're not going to go look at it ourselves.
And it's only for women?
Right. Well, so one thing you always want to look at when you look at a study is what are the inclusion and exclusion criteria, meaning who is in the study and who's out. If the study only looks at women, you might say, well, this may have limited applicability. It looks at obese postmenopausal women. So of course the media doesn't report that. They say a paleo diet was better at weight loss than a vegetarian diet. Okay. So these are researchers, again, from prestigious European institutions, fed a paleo diet consisting of 30% protein, 40% fat, and 30% carbohydrate to 10 obese, but otherwise apparently healthy postmenopausal women for 5 weeks. The women lost an average of 5 pounds and lost some fat from their livers. Well, that's pretty interesting, isn't it? If you're into paleo and you heard that, you'd go, cool, I'm right. It's been proven. 70% fat and protein is really, really high level. It's only 30% carbs. And these women lost 10 pounds in 5 weeks eating all that fat and protein. Told you, give me my buttered coffee. Give me my morning bacon. This just justifies everything, right? They also improved on some other measures. Their blood pressure got better, cholesterol, triglycerides got better. So the authors suggest a paleo diet can be protective against diabetes because one of the precursors to diabetes is fatty liver. So they were able to remove some fat from the liver by feeding these people a really, really high fat, high protein diet for 5 weeks. Now let's go back to the title of the study. A Paleolithic type diet causes strong tissue specific effects on ectopic fat deposition. Tissue specific effects. Doesn't that sound cool? Specific effects. It wasn't just it had effects, it had specific effects, and it had specific effects to tissue. And so the tissue that they of interest was the fatty liver. So here's an interesting tidbit that was not reported in the abstract. You had to go diving into the article to find it. They were eating 25% fewer calories than they had been previously. So the paleo diet was actually a calorie restrictive diet. So instead of eating 2,000, they might have been eating 1,500. They were 25% fewer calories. So if I tell you someone cuts their calorie consumption by 25% and they lose weight and their numbers get better, there's a scientific term for that. You know what it is? Big deal. You could have fed them Twinkies and Coca-Cola, and if you restricted their calories, their numbers were going to improve and they were going to lose some fat. That's simple thermodynamics. It's not a big deal. So
And if you got them to exercise, it will even work better.
it would even work better. So what's wrong with this study? First of all, there's no control group. So All we know is that this group of obese postmenopausal women lost 10 pounds in 5 weeks eating this diet that consisted of 30, 30, 40, and was 25% fewer calories than they'd eaten before. But what if you had a control group of another group of obese postmenopausal women and you gave them a different diet, let's say 80% carbs, 10% fat, 10% protein, but also 25% fewer calories? Would they have done as well or better?
Better.
We don't know. They didn't think to ask,
Would.
and of course they would. And none of the science writers, the journalists, ever brought this up. You know, if you're a journalist and you are writing about politics, you know, you don't just go to the Donald Trump rally and you write down everything Donald Trump says as if it's true. You ask other people. You try to corroborate. Science writers don't seem to do this. Very few. There's very few science writers who actually.
Why?
I don't know. I don't know whether they're untrained, whether they're in the pocket of industry, whether their editors don't want them to publish things that are negative, or that they think that people are too stupid to understand if they go into the nuance of it. I hope people understand what I'm saying. That's what I've made my career into, is kind of explaining these complicated things in a way that people can grasp. But let's get back to tissue specific, and then we can close it up for today. Tissue specific means there was fat loss in the liver, but not elsewhere. Not in the intramyocellular. Yep, it was specific to the liver, but not to the fat in muscles. So the article interprets this fact to say that the paleo diet has some sort of magical effect. It can target fatty liver. Wow, that's amazing. In fact, we know fatty liver is a precursor for diabetes. The trouble is, any weight loss will bring about fat loss in the liver. That's how the liver works. When you start losing weight and you need glucose, the liver will release glycogen. That's the most safest and most convenient store of glucose in the body. So you will lose fat in the liver. You'll lose weight because the fat and the glycogen in the liver is stored in water. So you're going to lose that water weight as well. But so the interesting thing here is there was no fat loss in the muscles. Now they say that's a cool thing. That shows that paleo is magic. It's got tissue specific effects. But the fat in the muscles is the fat you want to lose if you want to become healthy. The most important fact to come out of the study, and it was not reported by the journalist, was whole body insulin sensitivity did not change. In other words, because there was no fat loss in the muscle cells were not able to take in the insulin. And so what it's really saying is that this paleo diet, even though it caused weight loss, was actually a diabetes maintenance diet, as opposed to a diabetes reversal diet or a diabetes avoidance diet. So if you are a journalist or a blogger and you're on a deadline and you know that your media is being supported by junk food industry and by the National Cattlemen's Beef Board and the dairy industry and the egg board and Kellogg's and all these companies making crap food, and you go and you read you go to PubMed and you just read the abstract, you will write an article that is completely misleading and is killing people. And there's so many more examples of this. And I think maybe we're working on the technological advance of being able to show you my screen. We tried it earlier today. It didn't quite work, so I'm gonna get another adapter, and Amnon's gonna play around and see if we can get this. I can show you example after example after example, and it's not a bad thing to do, because through this kind of example teaching, I can actually not just tell you again and again, don't believe what you read, but I can show you how to read between the lines, how to do your own research, so that you don't have to depend on me or anyone else or any media to tell you what to believe. It's not as hard as you might think to go to the source, to learn a little bit of the technology, to learn a little bit of the terminology. So if I'm coming to Amnon for my computer and I have to come to him every single time I get the pinwheel of death or the blue screen or something is slow, you know, if I have to come to him every time I get a drop down that says, where do you want to save this? You know, I'm I'm helpless.
Move in.
I'm going to move in. I'm helpless. I'm going to hire him as my personal computer concierge. Instead, if I learn a few things about a computer, if I learn about how to tell when the clicking sound means that I need to replace my hard drive, or how to power the thing, then I'm independent, and I only need I'm on for the really important specific things that I can't handle on my own. Same it is with your body, which is, I would argue, a more important thing to know about how to take care of and how to feed correctly than your computer. You can always get another computer. It's very hard to get another body, regardless of what the geneticists tell us about what we're going to be able to replace. We're stuck with it. And you know what? If we treated our cars, if anyone treated their car the way we treated our bodies, the Motor Trend people would just shake their heads and say that's just utterly irresponsible. You know what? This is our vehicle. So going back to Ian's question about uncertainty and about vitamin D. So there's always uncertainty, there's always new evidence, but there's also what we'll call the preponderance of evidence, which is to say the blue sky. So the preponderance of evidence for vitamin D, when you look at the big picture, is that vitamin D is a symptom of disease as opposed to a cause of disease. There are studies in which people with low levels of vitamin D were sick. This is just like that Austrian vegetarians are sicker than meat eaters study. When we look at the snapshot, we see, oh, look, sick people with low vitamin D levels. So the answer then is to give people vitamin D supplementation. Well, in these studies, they didn't do that. They helped the people get well. And what happened when they got well is their vitamin D levels rose. So vitamin D turns out to be, in most cases, an outcome, not a cause. Just like last week we were talking about the Mercedes hood ornaments being an outcome of having the money to spend on a Mercedes, not the cause of having the money to spend on a Mercedes. So B12, when we look at are there toxic effects of B12 in high doses, for most people, no. There are some people who are highly sensitive to B12 and can get their blood level can be quite high. Those people, I would say, don't supplement. Keep an eye on it. Check it out every 6 months, every year. And remember, I do my disclaimer. This TV show is not a substitute for medical advice. See your medical professional before acting on any of the advice given here. This is just sharing the science. But typically, there's been B12, we need so little of it, maybe 3 micrograms a day, that the question is, so what if we're wrong? What if it's not useful? Well, it doesn't seem to hurt. It's pretty cheap. It's widely available. So if we're wrong, what's the problem? Vitamin D, on the other hand, is highly toxic in high doses, as is vitamin A, as turns out is beta carotene. There's a lot of supplements that turn out to be quite toxic in higher doses. And so we want to be really, really sure that we need them before we take them. And we want to be really, really sure that we're only prescribing them and giving them and recommending them to people for whom they will have a positive impact. So again, we have this idea of uncertainty. We're never entirely sure. We then look at the preponderance of evidence. And the preponderance of evidence means not just what the evidence is, but how good is it? Who funded it? Where did it appear? Was it peer reviewed? Has it been replicated? Does it make sense? Does it correspond to what we know about the world? Very often it doesn't. Very often someone will say, look, the sky is orange. And it's like the emperor's new clothes. All we need is a little child to say, that's BS. The sky is blue. And it can kind of pop it. But we're in a trance. We're in an industry-induced thought coma in which any garbage that comes down Facebook that tells us good news about the worst habits that we have, it suddenly becomes gospel truth. So I hope that helps in answering the D question. I will, Ian, go into vitamin D, and maybe I'll do a session on supplementation at some point. Next week, I want to take a little bit of a break from this topic, and I want to talk about habits and how to change our behaviors. Because this is, to some people, they already, okay, I get it. A plant-based diet, getting enough sleep, exercising is good, and I still don't know how to do it. I still don't know how to get it into my life. I try it for a few days. It tastes bland. I don't know how to cook this stuff. I'm worried about protein. I miss the chewiness of meat. What can I do? So next week, we're going to take a break from the head of a pin debate about nutrition, and we're going to talk about how you actually get change into your life. So I want to thank Mel, and I want to thank Ian for your questions and comments this week. If anyone has any more questions or comments, you're watching this on the YouTube, you can post comments below. It's always amazing to see comments on YouTube that are not like people screaming at each other and hurling epithets.
But I thought you want people to fight there.
You know, YouTube does. I don't.
No, oh, that's true.
I try to set up my business model so it doesn't depend on people behaving their worst in order for me to succeed. So again, I don't get paid by the food industry. I don't get paid by the pharmaceutical industry. I don't get paid by the medical industry. My money comes from two sources. It comes from my students and clients, and it comes from, on my websites, I put in Amazon affiliate links to the books I think you should buy.
Tell them the website.
The website, very good, is trianglebewell.com. You can, if you live in the Triangle region of North Carolina, you can come to my events. I have dinners, cooking classes. I'm doing a series of classes in Durham in January and February, 3 classes on diabetes and 3 classes on hypertension, and there will be food. I like to feed people who come to my events because, you know, well, when they're eating, they can't argue with me, right? But also just to kind of blow people's minds about how delicious a healthy plant-based diet can be. So that's Triangle Be Well. If you want to talk to me about consulting, about becoming a member of Triangle Be Well, if you want to avoid the diseases that get most of us in the West, I have, you know, the information and empowerment that can help you do that. Amnon, thank you again
And
for
all that information is on trianglebewell.com.
trianglebewell.com. First thing you could do, I have a report there. It's a free report. If you give me your name and email, you can get the Wellness GPS report. It explains how to navigate the medical system and who you can trust and who you can't, and how to do your own research. And it's designed to help people see both the medical model is broken and that there is an alternative. I know I talk a lot about negatives, but it's really in the context of tremendous hope that there are ways for people to get better. There are ways for people to reverse their conditions, reverse their diseases. There are ways for people who are in their 80s, who are sick, and at the end of life to turn it around and live another 15 good, healthy years with vigor, with independence, with movement, right? I mean, death claims us all. And we don't remember that day to day. We don't think about the fact that we're going to die. If we did, I think we would live a lot healthier. We'd live with a lot more meaning, right? The poet Wallace Stevens said, "Death is the mother of beauty," right? If we knew we'd live forever, then nothing really would matter. You know, if, my friend, professor of philosophy, David Brzezinski says, if we lived forever, life itself would be death. There would be no need for change, no need for growth. We're going to die. And that should help us understand that this is a precious life. As poet Mary Oliver says, our one wild and precious life. And so knowing that it's going to come to an end, is let's savor every minute of it. Let's savor both the length, the quantity, and the quality, and getting ourselves healthy through our own efforts. Right? We don't have to dig our graves with our knives and forks. We can build our bodies, build our minds, build our communities. We can be well, we can help each other, and we can change the world. So I want to thank you, Amnon, for hosting again.
No, thank you.
Thank you, Mel and Ian, for participating. And thank you for watching. And again, I'm Howard Jacobson. This is Triangle Be Well. And as always, be well, my friends.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. Our weekly lineup of call-in programs includes Computers 2K Now with Amnon Nissan, My Life, My Will with Gisela DiCarlo, The Tanya Love Show, Health Then with Debbie Bruck, Breaking Free with Marilyn Shannon, Triangle Be Well with Howard Jacobson, Lunch and Learn with Rabbi Yisrael Cutler, Lessons of Vietnam with NCVVI members, Parent Dome with Ryan Miller, Current Affairs with Amnon Nissan. And if you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section on nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Atomos.com, makers of quality video recorders and converters, CarolinaApparel.com, and DeltaForce.net.